Hi, this is Dark Journalist. Today I have the exciting conclusion to my deep discussion with Oxford scholar Dr. Joseph P. Farrell on the CERN Giza Death Star connection. Now, Dr. Farrell's Cosmic War book series reaches back beyond recorded history to document a period of intense high-tech warfare that took place in the very heart of Egypt. Now, in the first two episodes, we examined the deep implication of CERN's Hadron Collider experiments and the strange record of a superweapon that existed in ancient times. In this special episode, we'll examine the story of the Hall of Records and how it relates to a lost history and technology. Are we missing a crucial chapter in ancient history? Here we go. Dr. Joseph Farrell, Cosmogenesis, the ancient Egyptian Giza Death Star.
I strongly suspect that behind all of this stuff going on in the Middle East, they're trying to get their hands on this ancient technology. What they're doing is that they're looking for this stuff. It was not American soldiers going into the Baghdad Museum and looting it. That was a false flag. Somebody donned American uniforms, went in, grabbed all of this stuff, and allowed the United States to recover the artworks and kept the tablets.
You know, the more we look at ancient history, the older the experts are telling us that civilization was founded. It seems like even establishment archaeologists are taking a look at the methods that they're using for dating antediluvian cultures and realizing that their math simply doesn't add up. The next step will probably be to catch up with alternative researchers who have been showing evidence from South America to the Middle East that our ancestors were far more advanced than mainline academia will reveal. Are the legends in ancient Egypt of an advanced legacy culture the key to a cosmic war in history? Let's go ask Dr. Joseph Farrell.
Dark Journalist. Go for truth in 2017. The deepest questions, the biggest secrets, the darkest mysteries. Dark Journalist. Go for truth. With top guests like Graham Hancock.
Graham, how do we as a society escape the grip of the deep state in the 21st century?
Rather than spending trillions of dollars every year on building up our armies and our weapons of mass destruction and creating a climate of hatred and fear and suspicion, we should be uniting as a human race.
Catherine Austin Fitz.
Catherine, what is the issue that's holding us back and destroying prosperity?
We have a system which is got a negative return on investment. It's killing human productivity, and where it's going is inhuman.
Linda Moulton Howe.
Linda, you've been fighting against secrecy your whole life. How are we doing in this battle?
There is a kind of energy and synergy that you and I have because we are both trying so hard in so many facets to get to the bottom of what is the truth.
Dark Journalist. Go for truth. Visit darkjournalist.com and subscribe now for a special winter discount, available for just $39 for 1 full year. You'll receive exclusive member benefits, including access to the complete high-quality audio archives to stream or download at your convenience, and subscriber-only content, including bonus show material. Sign up for our free newsletter to stay updated on the latest shows. Dark Journalist. This is the year. Now is the time.
You know, we need dark journalists, so just keep doing what you're doing.
Join us now and go for truth.
Well, hello everyone. I hope your holidays all went well, and as we head into 2017, I'm sensing from a lot of different people a kind of determination to make a real difference this year and to look at things as they really are. And that's what we're trying to do here as well, so we're definitely in sync with you. Now, this is our third and final episode on CERN and the ancient Death Star connection with Dr. Farrell. And as we just got the news now of Carrie Fisher, who played Princess Leia, passing away in Los Angeles. Of course, she'll always be remembered and loved for her amazing performances in those early Star Wars movies. The Death Star is no doubt a very prescient symbol for some of the militarization of space that we're seeing now. But did it all happen before? This is what we'll find out today. And a quick reminder here to go to darkjournalist.com to sign up for our free newsletter so you don't miss any of the exciting shows we have coming up for you in 2017. Joseph, it's great to have you back for our third and final segment on the CERN Giza Death Star connection. Now, we've covered some major ground in the first two episodes, including the technological marvel of the Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. and the genius of the ancient mystery known as the Great Pyramid. What I'd like to do in this special episode is explore the ancient high-tech knowledge that forms the basis for so many early legends of humanity, and what that has in common with our own era of high scientific achievement. Now, it's obvious that some of that early high technology in ancient times was hidden because of its destructive power.
Right.
The memory of this enigma, known as the Hall of Records, has been reawakened in the past century or so in esoteric literature. You know, that there is this ancient pyramid that's buried out there in Egypt that contains these records from this antediluvian culture that was called Atlantis by Plato. It was the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce that referred to it in trance as being beneath the Sphinx. Now, I'm sure there are covert archaeological digs in certain circles that are hunting for this Hall of Records, because there's this idea out there, based on the literature, that these Atlantean firestones were placed within it when it was hidden. So my question is, can we connect these ideas of the Hall of Records and the Atlantean firestones as kind of wonder weapon with the Giza Death Star idea?
Well, I don't know so much about the Giza Death Star idea directly, because in my thinking, I'm following Alan Alford here, who suggested that there are actually 3 distinct layers of construction present at Giza. The Great Pyramid represents the oldest by itself. The second layer of construction would be the Sphinx, the Valley Temples, and the second big pyramid at Giza. And then the third layer would represent the distinctively Egyptian layer, all right? But that said, it's very interesting to me that in the Arab tradition, in the Muslim tradition, the Sphinx is known as the father of terrors. Why that? Why is Cairo Al-Qaeda in Arabic? Why is the city itself named after Mars? That's what Al-Qaeda means. It means Mars.
Strange.
The god of war. Why is that city and that place named after the god of war? So you have all these little indications that there's something preserved in human memory about that place in Egypt that's very dark. Now, the Sphinx, most people tend to think, and I'm one of them, tend to think that the head on the Sphinx is actually not original.
Interesting.
That it was recarved because it's out of proportion with the rest of the body. That it was recarved at a certain state. That the body itself may have had a very different head on it at one point. Maybe the god Anubis, whatever, but not the physical face that we see now. I'm one of them. And to me, then, that would represent possibly somebody trying to get rid of a memory and stamp a different memory on the place.
Yeah.
And again, the Arabic tradition indicates that maybe there was something about this. Now, the Hall of Records idea is, as you say, connected with the Sphinx, or thought to be underneath the Sphinx. But when you look at the ancient description of this, particularly in Egypt, the wisdom god Tehuta supposedly carved all knowledge on 2 pillars, one of stone and one of bronze. In other words, they were trying to protect the decay of knowledge from fire and water. Okay? Now, I've personally long suspected that the Hall of Records in this instance, that one of the pillars, is the Great Pyramid.
Now, why do you think that?
Again, because it has so much physical information embodied dimensionally in the structure. In other words, they're trying to cram as much information as possible into it. The question is why? Well, in my reading, it's not simply to preserve knowledge, but to create an oscillator able to affect and resonate with all those systems dimensionally, because it's got encoded analogs of it. And please note, it's an analog technology, not a digital one.
Oh. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, that's unexpected.
There's a huge key right there. There's a huge key.
Yeah. Well, that's intriguing because, of course, we've seen some researchers propose the idea that this information is encoded in these ancient structures because they knew at some point our knowledge would rise again. and that future cultures would be able to read what they've placed in there, mathematically, scientifically, and all the rest of it. But what you're saying goes one step further, because it suggests that these exact measurements and correlations to planets and the sun and the equinox and all these things, precession, is because it actually needs to be there in order to perform its particular function.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that means as we recover more science, we begin to recover the possibility of recreating the technology or reactivating it.
Right.
Now, let's go back to something we said earlier. And here again, I think there's a CERN tie-in. And that is because you recall I said that Dunn and Sitchin both came to the conclusion that there were things missing from the Great Pyramid. There were things taken out of it.
Yes.
And the way Sitchin puts it is that there were certain things removed from the structure after a war of the gods that would render the structure inoperable. So in other words, Sitchin is telling you, when you're looking at the Great Pyramid, you're looking at the shell of a machine. You're looking at, so to speak, a car engine without the pistons and the alternator.
Right.
Okay? The things that made it go. All right? But you're still looking at a machine, very definitely. Now, interestingly enough, and I put this in the Cosmic War, Sitchin believed that what was taken out of the pyramid were crystals, various types of crystals. Dunn believes that what was taken out of the pyramid were Helmholtz resonators resonant to different frequencies in the harmonic series. All right. Now, you could have both at the same time. Interestingly enough, when you look at an epic called the Epic of Ninurta, I talked about this at the Secret Space Program conference last year.
Okay.
When you look at the Epic of Ninurta, what you're dealing with is, sit down and read. I put the whole thing in the Cosmic War so that people could read this and say, where are academics getting the idea that this is any kind of an epic? Because, quite simply, it's boring.
Right.
Okay? It's 12 pages of nothing but an inventory of all of these stones, or maize, as the Sumerians and Mesopotamians called them, that were used in a weapon in this war, that were taken out of the weapon, inventoried, and then some were carted off to be used in other applications. Some were destroyed, and there was a very small category of these stones or maize or crystals that could not be destroyed, and so they were hidden so that they couldn't be used again. All right?
Interesting.
Now, I strongly suspect, Daniel, that behind all of this stuff going on in the Middle East, what they're doing is that they're looking for this stuff. They're trying to get their hands on this ancient technology. Let's remember who was sponsoring or helping Sitchin. Where did Sitchin, supposed antiquities and antiques dealer, have his offices? Well, in Rockefeller Center.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
that is a strange tie.
Yeah, that's a strange tie right there.
Uh-huh.
So what I suspect they're doing is that they're looking for this technology, this ancient technology. They're trying to see if he was correct, or if people like me are correct, that there was this very sophisticated technology, or at least information about it, or information about where it might be found.
Yeah.
I strongly suspect this.
So just to get us all on board on this, you think that they have extensive clandestine programs in the intelligence agencies trying to locate some of these lost ancient superweapons. Why do you think that's true? And what's the genesis of this whole project?
Well, let's go back to Nazis. Let's remember what Heinrich Himmler did. He set up what was called the Ancestral Research and Teaching Bureau of the SS, the Ahnenerbendienst. And in his little memo decreeing the establishment of this, Himmler specified that we're going to go out and send all these archaeological teams all over the world and gather all this stuff together for its potential military application. So in other words, lo and behold, right there, you have a major power saying, we're going to go out and look for this stuff to see if we can use it, in our schemes for world domination. Well, you know, if the Nazis are going to do it, and you're the Allies and the Soviets after the war, and you're coming in and reading all this strange stuff, are you going to ignore it or do it yourself? Well, you're going to do it yourself, especially if you think the Nazis may have stolen a march on you and gotten a hold of some of this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to do it.
Especially if you have access to all their materials, too. They've already they're 10 years ahead of you in research. Hey, you just jump right in.
You just jump right in. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That is fascinating, though, because it explains a lot, too. And they did, you know, have a program in the CIA where they were looking for Noah's Ark.
Yep.
Which is very unusual.
Oh, yeah. Nick Redfern has an interesting book out there, a short, small little paperback called The Pyramids and the Pentagon. You know, and I love the title.
That's pretty catchy.
Oh, yeah, Nick, you're right on target.
Oh, he knows
there.
where to find the weird stuff.
Yeah, he knows where to find the weird stuff. But yeah, it's all about these strange programs that, you know, the American defense complex has been pursuing in the name of getting, you know, advanced defense technologies. And again, you know, why do we have physicists investigating the Great Pyramid and so on and so forth? Well, they're doing this for a reason, and it's probably not concerned with bettering the human lot.
Yeah.
You know.
Right, exactly. Now, when you look at something like the looting at the Baghdad Museum during the Iraq War, is that a good example of what you're talking about here?
Ding, ding, ding.
Well, they wanted something that was in there badly because so many artifacts just disappeared.
Oh, listen, I've written about that event in footnotes in my books extensively. The first time I wrote about that, I believe, was in The Philosopher's Stone, and then in subsequent books, even in SS Brotherhood of the Bell. I'll tell you why I think that whole thing is extraordinarily suspicious. The United States appointed a Marine colonel by the name of Bogdanovich, who wrote a book about his experience trying to track down the stolen loot from the Baghdad Museum. Well, he tells you in the book that, firstly, whoever it was that looted the museum had inside information and it knew exactly what they were going for and where to find it. And the other thing he tells you is that the United States was successful in regaining and reclaiming most of the stolen art treasures. But never, ever in his book, nor in any contemporary coverage of that story, do they talk about what else was looted from the Baghdad Museum. And this is where the story gets extremely interesting. The other things that were looted from the museum were literally tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets that, here it comes, the Germans working for Saddam Hussein had found.
Right.
Now, those tablets have never been recovered. Subsequently, there was a story where tens of thousands of tablets ended up in, Spain. Isn't that interesting? And the Spanish government is refusing the request of the Iraqi government to give any of these tablets back.
Whoa.
Now, I find Spain interesting because, of course, Spain is one of the hubs for these post-war Nazis. But the other problem here is Saddam Hussein had teams of French and German archaeologists digging up all these sites all over Iraq. And here's where the story gets interesting. The story of the Baghdad Museum looting was broken in the Western press by Der Spiegel in Germany. It didn't even make American news until it was broken by Der Spiegel. And it was Der Spiegel that pointed out that American soldiers were the ones seen going into the Baghdad Museum and carting out crates of stuff by local Iraqis. Now, let's get even more interesting. How did they know where to find these cuneiform tablets? Well, the problem here is that the Baghdad Museum itself had no copies of inventory of these tablets. The copies of what was found were in the field reports, the field archaeological reports of the French and German teams doing the digging for Saddam Hussein. So in other words, the Germans and the French knew what they were finding.
Wow.
Gets even more interesting. And I suspect strongly, Daniel, since you had at that time and have to this day a strong human on-the-ground presence in Iraq of the German BND, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, that was working in conjunction with these teams for Saddam Hussein. I strongly suspect that it was not American soldiers going into the Baghdad Museum and looting it, that was a false flag. Somebody donned American uniforms, went in, grabbed all of this stuff, and allowed the United States Marine Colonel Bogdanovich to recover the artworks and kept the tablets. And I think you know who I suspect was behind that.
Oh, well, that's intriguing. You know, if they ended up in Spain, it makes sense that the Germans got their hands on it because they're the ones who would have known.
They were the ones who would have known. You know, they would have done a simple scan through translation of these tablets as they were in, simply so that they could inventory. This tablet's about this tablet's about that. So in other words, these French and German archaeological teams, who incidentally, when we went into Iraq, guess what we did? We told the Germans and the French, get out, we're coming in. So in other words, I'm going to crawl way out onto the end of the limb here and tell you that ultimately, this probably wasn't about oil. This probably wasn't about regime change. It's about all of those things, to be sure. But it was also about not letting the French and Germans get their hands on what we want to get our hands on.
Yeah, and it relates to the ancient technology.
Well, probably.
That is so fascinating. You know, in your work, you focus on Thoth, the Egyptian deity, and you pronounce it Tehuda, and I know that's the actual authentic way to say it, Tehuda, Thoth, Hermes. So you focus on this and the Egyptian wisdom tradition. Do you think that he's representing, then, this remnant of the Atlantean culture?
Yeah, yes, I do. Because, again, you have a clear reference in Egyptian literature to Tehuda anticipating the deluge and wanting to preserve this knowledge and therefore inscribing it on these two pillars, which of course become the pillars of knowledge in Masonic lodges, Yachin and Boaz. All right.
Right.
Yeah. So there's yet another connection to esoteric systems and secret societies. But yes, I think this because it's clear that this is what the reference is in Egyptian literature itself. They're anticipating a crisis. He's trying to preserve as much knowledge as possible. Now, that fits in with my cosmic war idea because if you're an ancient, very high society blowing yourself to smithereens, well, what do as you're seeing the collapse of your infrastructure? You start planning to preserve as much as possible. Continuity of government, you know, that's exactly what's going on.
Right, exactly.
You plan to preserve as much of the knowledge as you can and begin to draw people together for that purpose. So you have literally a continuity of government operation being designed to preserve and hand down the knowledge and create groups of people that are going to be able to do it. So what happens after this cosmic war? What do you see? Well, you see all of these megalithic building projects all over the world. And oddly enough, they're using a metrology or systems of measure that are based on astronomical and geodetic units. Why? Well, if you're going to have commerce on a non-local basis, you have to have units of measure that are applicable all over that anybody with normal physics sense can derive from geodetics or astronomical observation. So in other words, you're jump starting, you know, after wiping out the civilization and therefore commerce, you're jump starting the whole system again by creating these units of measure, these monuments that embody them and therefore make commerce possible. So in other words, you've got elites, continuity of government driving the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really fits together. Now, the mystery schools that sprang up around the Egyptian and Hermetic wisdom traditions, they carried so much of this special knowledge right into the Middle Ages. And as you've written in Thrice Great Hermetica about how this wisdom survived and was rediscovered by the Templars years later. Now, based on your research, what secret society or mystical brotherhood kept the real core of this information and tradition?
Pythagoreans.
The Pythagoreans.
The Pythagoreans, yes. Simply because of their strong Babylonian ties, their fascination with the harmonic series, and its relationship to cosmology.
Okay.
But I think you've got something else operative here. And the key, once again, is continuity of government. And I'm using that phrase to get people into the habit of thinking about these ancient things, mystery schools and so on, in a modern way so that you can see the parallels of what's going on. Because you've just fought a war.
Right, right.
So if you've just fought a war that's exhausted everybody, does everybody go home and forget about it? No. You've got continuing elites in every human war, particularly, World War I and World War II. You've got these continuing elites that are going to try and reestablish their basis of power and so on and so forth. That's what I think you are seeing with these mystery schools. But you've got another element entirely, and that's bloodlines, that's families. Why? Because if you look at ancient Mesopotamia, if you look at ancient Egypt, you have this persistent focus on the divine right of kings, of the kingship that was called down from heaven to earth. Sitchin emphasizes this, and that's literally what the texts say. They brought kingship to earth. Mm-hmm. In other words, they brought civilization, they brought government, they brought organization. And it's in the hands, if you look at the lists of the kings, the Manetho list in Egypt, if you look at the Beresis list, the Sumerian kings list, and so on in Mesopotamia, what do you see? Well, you see these genealogies that are tracing the human kings to the gods and their interference and consanguination and cohabitation with men. So you've got bloodlines that are involved. And this is what I think you see with the Templars, because what happened, let's go back to the Templar story. You had these families, the original 9 knights, that represented families in France that were all interrelated to each other, that clearly had some information before they even set off to the Middle East to go digging under Solomon's temple, pretending they're protecting pilgrims from all the ravaging Muslims around. Okay, well, 9 knights ain't going to do the job, folks. Let me tell you. And what they're really doing is archaeological digs, just like we're doing now, under guise of regime change and so on. Well, that's exactly what the Templars did. We don't like these Muslims running the place. We're going to put in a Christian king over there. Regime change, folks, continuity of government. Yeah. This is what's going on. And they obviously discover something. They come back to Europe and they're filthy rich overnight.
Something happened.
So they either found a lot of money, or they're paying off somebody, or the church is paying them off. Something's going on here.
Yeah, they're getting a big upgrade.
Well, as I pointed out in Thrice Great Hermetica, the Templars, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, were known in the Middle Ages. This is what really freaks people out, and the Templars knew about it.
Yeah.
So in other words, yeah, you've got all of this interconnection there. You've got the temple treasure in the Copper Scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, lo and behold, if you look at the systems of measure in the Copper Scroll with Egyptian systems of measure, they make sense.
So it goes back to Egypt.
It goes back to Egypt and Akhenaten and that whole thing tied into the Essenes and so on and so forth. And, we're back to square one. The Templars found something, I think, that completely undid the standard history. And I think the key lies in Egypt once again.
Just amazing.
Yep.
And of course, the Templars paid dearly for their knowledge in the end.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Interesting. Now, I know there'll be some new revelations on the Templars that you'll be writing about with the publication of some rare transcripts that are coming out about their trials. Just fascinating stuff.
Right.
And something I'm going to try and cross-reference here into our discussion on this ancient knowledge is the term chemi. Now, this was the original name for Egypt. What can you tell me about it?
Chem, or chemet. And it's the word root from which we get chemistry and alchemy. Yeah.
Interesting. Very unusual root there.
Uh-huh.
Now, you use this term alchemy a lot in your writings, and I guess my question is, do we have the alchemical link back to ancient Egypt that survived, and why do we see this term so often in your work?
I use the term alchemy very deliberately in that sense because in my books I discuss something a lot called the topological metaphor of the medium, in which you strip away the terms of philosophy or theology or what have you, or metaphysics, and actually symbolize it mathematically, which you can do. When you symbolize it mathematically, lo and behold, what's popping out at you is topology. You're talking about a very high order mathematics that will function in a kind of hyperdimensional mathematical and physical world. So yeah, these people understood that everything is an open system and therefore related to everything else. And you had but to understand the deep structure of how these things were related in order to be able to manipulate it. And I think that's where we're getting back to.
That's very interesting. And it reminds me of this feeling that I get when I've read some powerful ancient literature, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, for example.
Yes.
It feels like a volume that was written on another planet, frankly, because the vision of the people is so different. And the way they're describing and looking at things, they're in a totally different state than ordinary modern consciousness.
Yes.
Now, the traditional explanations have been, they were just primitive cultures with arcane beliefs, or as we've seen with something like Ezekiel's wheel and his series of visions, it's always explained away and brushed off with he was some primitive peasant who'd been in the sun too long. I mean, we're missing something important here.
No, I don't think Ezekiel was primitive, no.
No, definitely not. He sounds like an engineer to me.
Well, look, since you mentioned Ezekiel, let's talk about an interesting passage in Ezekiel for the ancient aliens people to ponder.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite ones to point out to them, It's the passage concerning Lucifer. And the passage goes, "Thy tabrets and pipes were made perfect in thee." And stop and think about that now. Tabrets, a membrane, in other words. Pipes. Now, you can obviously take that language as describing a physiology. Cut someone open, and what do you find? Membranes or tabrets and lots of pipes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. You could also use it to describe a machine.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. Membranes, pipes, columns, hollow areas, and so on and so forth. And again, you look at Lucifer's crown. The 12 stones on his crown are all crystals. They all have very unusual properties when you look into them. And coincidentally, they're the same 12 stones on the breastplate of the Jewish high priest. Oh, wow. That's a trip.
Is it Urim and Thummim?
Well, the Urim and Thummim they're not the stones on the breastplates. The breastplate itself is made of 12 stones. And it's the same 12 stones supposedly on Lucifer's crown. And they're all very interesting, especially sapphire. Because what's sapphire? Well, as I point out in the Giza Death Star books, sapphire has some very unusual properties in that it is able, or thought to be able, to detect gravitational waves. Oh,
that's interesting.
Yeah, that ain't it though. So yeah, you've got all of these very strange things, and as far as I'm concerned, what you're looking at a lot of times in these texts is therefore kind of a legacy or a residue of what may once have been a very, very high science. And you see this, you get that feeling that there's something more going on here when you read things like the Book of the Dead, or one of my favorites, the pyramid texts
Yes.
of Egypt. If you've never read the pyramid text, read the beginning of that. Just the very beginning. It's the first sentence. And what you're reading is the beginning of the Gospel of St. John. Thousands of years earlier.
Incredible.
Yeah, incredible stuff. And, when you're putting it that way, just look at the beginning of the Gospel of St. John in the Greek, enarchi no logos, ke logos in proston theon, ke theos in logos. Well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What's that really telling you? What's that word logos doing there? Well, logos in the Greek is a very, very rich term. It means mind, rational principle. In the Latin, the word is translated ratio, reason, ratio, proportion. So in other words, it's telling you that there is an intimate connection with reason, proportion, human life, and so on and so forth. It's setting up, as it were, the entire development of Western culture, because you're going to have people accepting the story, you're going to have people rejecting the story, and they're all doing one or the other on the basis of what? Well, reason.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in other words, you're setting up a cultural paradigm here that, if you look at it, is really very, very ancient, extremely ancient. You've got that ancient idea of mankind being the microcosm. Why? Well, interestingly enough, modern physics is confronting the same idea. You've got the anthropic cosmological principle, where if you sit down and look at the dimensions of physics, from the very large, the galactic clusters, to the very small little particles that quantum mechanics investigates, when you examine the dimensional scale of these things, guess where mankind fits in? Right smack dab in the middle. Mathematically, just like the ancients thought. So in other words, what's happening, I think, Daniel, is as our physics and science is getting much more sophisticated, lo and behold, what it's doing, just like I put it in the preface of Grid of the Gods, what science is doing is it's recreating that ancient mindset and showing why that ancient mindset wasn't really all that nuts after all. That ancient mindset was quite literally a legacy of something much higher that pre-existed it and handed it down. And over time, of course, that knowledge gradually declined, but it was still preserved. And this is what I think is so very interesting about Egypt in particular, is because Egypt will tell you, if you take what the Egyptians say about themselves at their word, what they tell you is they're a legacy culture of something that pre-existed them.
Right, exactly. There's that other more advanced culture back there that understood these mathematical and what we'd call spiritual principles now.
Right.
Well, Joseph, this is just great. What an overview on these advanced ancient cultures and their technology and weaponry, along with their modern counterparts. Now, my last question for you is about these transcripts of the Templar trials that are coming out. And I know you said the volumes will be limited and expensive,
right,
and I hope you get your hands on them. What do you think we'll find in there?
I think there's going to be some stuff in there that scholars are going to be poring over for many generations, reassessing the whole thing. I really do.
Now, do you think it's possible that the Templars could have become corrupted by the incredible secrets that they found?
I don't think so much corrupted by what they found. I think that they were corrupt before they went there.
I see.
Find it. In other words, I think they knew more or less what they were looking for. I really think the corruption begins, and this is another part of the Templar story that people forget, that the Templars were actually planning to have their own state in Europe, consisting of Aragon in Spain around Barcelona, and then across the Pyrenees into the Languedoc in southern France, where the Cathars were based. They wanted their own state. And their relationship with the Cathars is peculiar, because if you're the papacy looking at the Cathars at the time, you've got this heretical group sitting in the most prosperous region of Europe at that time, and prosperous largely because, I think, of their relationship with the Templars. So as I put it in Thrice Great Hermetica, what you see the papacy doing, and Philippe le Bel doing, is a very carefully crafted long-term strategic plan that, pardon me, begins with the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars to take out the center of Templar power in Europe. And then once that's completed, then Philippe le Bel comes along and shuts them down in France, and you get Pope Clement V saying, yeah, we're shutting down the order, turning all of their property over to guess who? The Knights Hospitallers, now known as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And the story goes on from there, and includes such people as Blackwater and Governor Frank Keating of Oklahoma, and a whole other sort of, William Casey of Ronald Reagan's.
Oh, yeah.
On and on we go. Yeah.
It is amazing. And the Templar, I think, this aspect that they were really seeking out, as you put in the book, that they ran across, potentially ran across Lucifer's crown, I thought was very interesting. And that was something that fascinated the Nazis.
Well, yeah, the whole business about Lucifer's crown was found by a German by the name of Otto Rahn, that between the wars went to the Languedoc, befriended the local French people there, and tried to learn their traditions. And he ran into a French shepherd that preserved an old tradition that the crusade was really about finding the stones of Lucifer's crown so that they could put it in the crown of Satan, the leader of Satan's army, meaning the Pope, put the stones in the papal tiara.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what.
That's kind of a disturbing story.
That's a very disturbing story, because you couldn't get more satanic in terms of behavior or morality than Lothario de Conte, Pope Innocent III. This guy, he was a piece of work. But
let's just say he wasn't so innocent.
No, no, this guy wasn't innocent by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, that's the Cathar story. And, Otto Rahn finds this, and then he goes back to Germany and writes a couple of books about his experience in the Languedoc, and comes to the attention of Heinrich Himmler, who drafts him into the SS, forces him to join the SS and share all of his information with the SS. And then Rahn has a skiing accident. Rahn was a homosexual, and apparently Himmler found out about this. So Rahn has a skiing accident in Austria and mysteriously dies. And then, just to round all this nuttiness out, you have in August of 1944, you have Otto Skorzeny leading a bunch of SS people down to the Languedoc, digging all over the place. And one of the regiments assigned to him is the von Salza regiment. And that name, if you're German, von Salza was one of the original Teutonic Knights that had been set up by Emperor Frederick II. So you've got von Salza and the Teutonic Knights under Skorzeny digging up southern France for who knows what. And to complete the strangeness, when Martin Bormann's wife is captured by the Allies, making her way from Austria into Italy, she has a bag of gold coins with her, of ancient gold coins. And that's all we know. We don't know where they're from, where they came from, what she was doing with them in the first place. And just to tweak it one teensy little bit more, during his infamous attack on General George Marshall in the United States Senate, Senator McCarthy attacked General Marshall for the Allied invasion of southern France, Operation Anvil, in late August of 1944. And why does he attack him? Well, we didn't need to launch yet another huge invasion because the Nazis are already on the run. Why are we invading southern France?
Totally unnecessary.
Totally unnecessary operation. And of course, Marshall, didn't say anything basically to defend it militarily. I've always suspected we were invading southern France because Scorzani and all of these SS commandos are down there digging up something, and we wanted to find out what.
Yeah.
So archaeology wars again,
No question. Yeah, you could literally do a whole book just on that.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I do think that the gold coins with Bormann's wife, considering who Bormann was, is a very telling incident because it makes you think that they found Templar treasure, and when the Nazis try to flee with it, we decided to go in and look for ourselves.
Well, I'll tell you what. Scorzani signaled to Himmler when he was down there, "We found it." Telegraphed Himmler and said, "We found it." Doesn't say what it is, but does say we found it.
That's pretty amazing.
And then Himmler sent an airplane fly around the Languedoc, right around Rennes-le-Château, as a matter of fact, writing something in the sky. I don't remember what it was, doing skywriting as part of some occult ritual. And then Scorzani and his commandos pack up the trucks, according to the local French, with something, and back to Germany they go.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That whole mystical Arthurian side of the Nazi period is very compelling because they're so informed about the esoteric and the mystical. They know the imagery, of the Holy Grail and also really the black arts side. So they were interested in using these magical items to attain more power. And their research into occult studies really differentiates their objectives, say, from other powers of the same period. They believed in the ancient super race idea, and they were willing to twist the mystical narrative to suit their own aims, really. I remember reading about Hitler. He had this quest to attain a particular sword that was held in Austria in an ancient collection at a museum.
Yes, it's in the Hofburg. The Spear of Longinus was what he was looking for.
Yes, that's it. And then after they took over Austria, taking a picture, holding it, just obsessed with this ancient power symbol. Like with the modern museum looting, they certainly understood the power of these artifacts.
Yes. They understood at least the power of the symbolism.
Yeah.
Of them. Himmler, it's interesting that Himmler sponsored this whole thing in southern France because Otto Rahn had come to the conclusion that the Holy Grail was actually a stone, not a cup.
Kind of makes sense, actually.
And that it was directly tied to this whole idea of the stones of Lucifer's crown. And again, if you had the Templars going off to dig under the Temple Mount, maybe they were digging for the stones of the breastplate of the high priest. And again, those stones were the same types of stones that were on Lucifer's crown. So, all of this to me indicates there's been a huge hidden archaeological war of some sort going on between certain parties in continental Europe, and then you've got the British and the United States representing the other angle to all of this. All of this is tied together. I'm quite certain, but it's a bizarre story. It's a Hollywood B movie type of story because it's so crazy. I mean, we've gone
super secret.
Yeah, we've gone from Ron to Himmler to Otto Scorzani to Joseph McCarthy and General Marshall, and
I know what other historical figure is going to pop up.
Yeah,
here?
What other historical figures can we cram into this bizarre narrative? But it's all there. That's the problem with it.
Sure,
it's just bizarre.
Well, Joseph, this has just been a great series on CERN and the Giza Death Star connection, touching on Egypt, ancient Egypt, Atlantis, the Hall of Records, the mystical traditions of hiding this knowledge in alchemical symbolisms through centuries. What are your final thoughts here on the ancient and future Death Star? Maybe CERN is the prototype for the new one?
Well, let's go back to the idea that Sitchin had, that what was taken out of the Great Pyramid, particularly out of the Grand Gallery, were crystals that were, in my thinking, resonant somehow to different systems in local space. Now, there's 2 points here that tie this whole idea both backward and forward. The tie backward is if you go and look at a book called Ancient Egyptian Amulets and Superstitions by Wallace Budge, the famous Egyptologist. He points out that in esoteric lore, and I talked about this in the Giza Death Star books, that in esoteric lore, certain stones are tied with certain planets. Diamonds, sapphires, carborundum, rubies, garnets, and so on, are tied to certain planets. And there's no explanation for why this is there, but it's very old. It's a very, very old idea in esoteric lore. The Mesopotamians have it too. The question is why? Why is this there? And then you get the idea that they tell you, well, astrological observation is the result of thousands of years of observation. That's what they tell you. In other words, this wasn't a made-up thing. This was a science based on observation over thousands of years. The tie forward is to CERN is remember what the collectors, the detectors in CERN are made out of. They're made out of very exotic crystal structures, very expensive, lead, tungsten, quartz, in crystalline form, very heavy, to detect all of this stuff. So I think there's a tie there. And most interestingly, could it be, I'm just gonna speculate wildly here, could it be that in studying some of these ancient things, they came up with the idea for the crystals for their detectors? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that, though.
I can see it, too.
Joseph, just amazing stuff. Of course, we're looking forward to some great new episodes with you in 2017. And make sure everyone goes to darkjournalist.com to sign up for the newsletter to stay updated on our new shows. And subscribe now for all the high-quality audio and video files and some special surprises coming your way. That discount, if you're renewing your subscription for this new year, is there for you now, so take advantage of it. For more information on Joseph's work, that's at gizadeathstar.com.
Yeah.
Joseph, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Well, thank you for having me back on. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for joining me for this fascinating Part 3 episode with Dr. Joseph Farrell on Cosmogenesis, the ancient Egyptian Giza Death Star. You can find more deep interviews, special reports, and documentaries at www.darkjournalist.com. You can also subscribe here to our YouTube channel to receive the latest videos. See you soon.
Subscribe to our newsletter at darkjournalist.com to stay updated on the latest shows.